Okay, picking up again with purchase and sales agreements, handout 10. On the next to the last page, near the top, brokers. You'll see we have two imaginary brokers listed here. They're stating that they're going to get a 6% commission that will be split between the two of them. Commissions are normally paid by the sellers, and the commissions will go to both brokers and be split by them. The next clause is very important, particularly if you're representing a seller of property. So what this is a no warranty with all faults clause. So what they're basically saying is that the property is being sold and as is condition. The sellers are promising nothing. They're giving guarantees about nothing. So if the entire house falls down the day after you buy it, that's too bad, Mr. Buyer. We're the sellers. We already got our check and left. We're done. Now, to counteract that, again, the legislature about 10 years ago got involved and have now, under Rhode Island General Laws 5-20.8.4, has included an inspection provision and language that has to be placed into every purchase and sales agreement for residential property. Under this statute, a buyer of residential property has an absolute 10 business day period to have the property inspected, and if they find anything in that inspection they don't like, then basically they are allowed to get out of the deal. Their deposit is handed back to them, the contract is voided, and each party shakes the dust off their feet and goes on their way. Right? They have to be given notice of this right to have an inspection in the purchase and sales agreement, or the purchase and sales agreement could possibly be deemed to be void. This is somewhat problematic, although it's been Rhode Island for a long time. The Realtors Association also allowed for inspections after signing the purchase and sales agreement, because what happens here is very often this gives the buyer a second bite at the apple. They've negotiated to a certain purchase price that neither side might be particularly happy with, but that's what they've come down to and agreed to. Now the buyer goes through, hires an inspector who comes up with a laundry list of all kinds of potential issues, and now the renegotiations begin. Particularly if the sellers say, we're not repairing anything, we just want to get money and get out of here, then the buyer starts saying, well, fine, but because of all these deficiencies, we want $10,000 or $20,000 or $30,000 off the sales price. So very often it becomes a way, particularly for unscrupulous buyers, to get a second chance at negotiating the purchase and sales agreement. To get around this, Massachusetts, in most places in the eastern part of the state that I'm familiar with now, once the buyer has handed in that offer form saying we would like to buy the house for this, we're willing to enter in a purchase and sales agreement, during the period while they're waiting for the final purchase and sales agreement, all inspections must be done then. And if the buyers have any issues, they have to state them then, and so that whatever issues remain are written into the purchase and sales agreement. The value of them is written into the purchase and sales agreement, and at that point, once the purchase and sales agreement is signed, that is basically set in concrete. I didn't like that system when it first developed in Boston on the North Shore and came down this way about 10 years ago during the real estate boom. And as more and more mass realtors were using it, I wasn't particularly comfortable with it. But now I look back and I really see there is wisdom in that, because at that point there's usually only $500 or $1,000 that's been paid that's on the line between anybody. You have all your inspections done, you work the amount of what repairs that you need done into the final price of the property, and then it's over and done with. And it prevents the type of situation where at the closing we're having last minute arguments over, were repairs done, were they done the way the buyer likes them, were they done up to code, all kinds of other things that come into play by having your inspection after the P&S agreement is signed. But the Rhode Island legislature, for its wisdom or lack thereof, has plowed right ahead in this area, and there is no choice today. In any residential transaction, the buyer has a 10-day right to get their own inspector into that property and have an inspection done, and then they have another period of time to hand the report to the sellers and say, here's what we found wrong with the property, fix it or we are walking. This goes on to talk again about lead inspections, and also two things that are very important if you're buying property outside of a municipality in the suburbs or out in the country in Rhode Island is private well water inspection and cesspool inspection. Private well is a well that's drilled into the ground or dug into the ground on the property and provides the water for the house. And several issues come up with wells. One is what's called potability, which is the water drinkable? Is it free from toxic minerals? Is it free from bacteria? The other that comes in is flow rates. How much water comes into the well? If your child takes a 40-minute shower, will that leave you without water for the next 3 days to run the house? So very important to have the wells inspected, not only for the quality of the water, but also for the amount of water that can be provided to the property. Cesspools. If you live outside of one of the municipal sewer systems in the state, you will have what's called an on-site wastewater treatment system. And that is basically apparatus in the ground where the water from flushing your toilets and emptying your drains goes out into a holding tank, and then from the holding tank into something called a leach field, which is gravel and rock placed under the ground, and it disperses the wastewater and whatever's in the wastewater out into the ground, where it can be biologically broken down and safely returned back into the environment. Many of the older properties in Rhode Island have what's called a cesspool. A cesspool is basically just a hole dug in the ground, like a negative well or a dry well, that you dump water into and hope that eventually it will drain away. Or there have been properties I've dealt with where there were two 50-gallon drums stuck in the ground 10 feet behind the house, and all the wastewater went in there, and in the winter you could tell where they were because the hot water from the house would bubble up through the ground, and there would never be any snow or frozen earth above these tanks. Cesspools are now illegal. There is a program requiring that by a certain point in 2022 or 23 they must all be replaced, and there is a clause in that program that says if the property is being bought and sold, provision for the replacement of the property must be dealt with at that time. Now again, if you're buying a piece of property and the disclosure form determines that there is some kind of on-site septic system, you need to get that inspected. In Rhode Island, the Rhode Island statute here gives you the absolute right to get it inspected. And if there is a cesspool where that needs to be replaced and a septic system needs to be put in, that needs to become a negotiation point, because septic systems can run up to $30,000 or $40,000. In Rhode Island, the majority of them run between $5,000 and $15,000, but depending on the nature of the soil and the conditions and how close wetlands and other neighbors are, they can be outrageously expensive.